The King and the Empty Calabash. In the ancient kingdom of Ahuana, where the earth was as red as sunset dust and the sky carried the whispers of ancestors, there lived a king named Fadik. His palace, built from golden clay and decorated with carved wooden totems, was admired across the land. Travelers spoke of his wealth, his power, and the vibrance of the markets under his rule. Everything seemed perfect except for one thing. His people were slowly forgetting the meaning of responsibility. The elders murmured about it. The land showed signs of it, and the king could feel it growing like a crack beneath the surface of his throne. One day, as he walked through the palace gardens, Fadik noticed something troubling. The water in the royal fountain barely trickled, though every villager claimed to fetch water daily. The gardens wilted even though everyone swore they had watered the plants, and the granary walls sagged, though each person believed someone else had strengthened them. Everyone thought their part didn't matter. The king sighed deeply, telling his chief advisor, "Little neglect when multiplied becomes a great burden." The advisor nodded gravely. "My king, the people forget that a kingdom stands only when everyone stands with it." That night, Fadik sat in silence under the moon, thinking of a way to teach his people not with punishment, not with anger, but with wisdom. And then an idea came to him, as clear as the silvery glow that washed the palace walls. He would test their sense of collective duty. The next morning, drums rolled through the kingdom. Their deep boom echoed across courtyards, farmlands, and rivers. Villagers emerged from their homes with curiosity and excitement. Children climbed trees to get a better view. The town criers walked forth with decorated staffs and declared the king's message. "In 3 days a grand feast will be held in the palace courtyard. Every household must bring a calabash of their finest palm wine to pour into the king's great communal gourd. Together the kingdom shall drink as one." The news spread like wildfire. Some people danced, some checked their wine stores, some grumbled but agreed. It was, after all, the king's command. But in the midst of this, a man named Tund thought differently. Tund was not a bad man. He was simply practical, or so he told himself. He sat outside his hut that afternoon, staring at his humble calabash. His wife asked if he would prepare the wine. He shrugged and said, "Why should I empty my best wine into the king's gourd? There will be hundreds of calabashes. What difference will mine make? One calabash of water and all that wine will go unnoticed." He laughed softly at his own cleverness. So instead of wine, Tund filled his calabash with plain, clean water from the well. "It will mix with the others," he reasoned. "No one will know." And with that choice, he went to sleep peacefully, unaware of how many other villagers had thought the exact same thing. At last, the day of the feast arrived. The palace courtyard was alive with color. Draped fabrics swayed in the breeze. Dancers rehearsed near the drums, and cooks roasted goat meat and seasoned rice. Everyone was excited, for the great feast especially, to taste the legendary communal wine of unity, which had been a tradition for generations. One by one, villagers stepped forward to pour their contribution into the king's massive carved gourd. It stood at the center of the courtyard, decorated with cowrie shells and protective symbols. The sound of liquids splashing filled the air. Laughter rose. Children clapped. Elders nodded with pride. Even Tund, acting innocent, stepped forward and poured in his calabash of water. When the last villager had contributed, the king stepped forth. Musicians stopped playing. The marketplace chatter faded. All eyes turned to Obafadik, who wore his ceremonial robe woven with the colors of the rising sun. He lifted the great ladle carved from elephant tusk, dipped it into the communal gourd, and filled a golden cup. With slow, ceremonial reverence, he lifted the cup toward the sky and declared, "To unity, to responsibility, to the power of every person's contribution." The crowd cheered. But then he brought the cup to his lips. He took one sip, and suddenly he stopped. The courtyard fell silent. The king lowered the cup slowly, deep disappointment clouding his face. "This," he said quietly, "is water." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Confusion spread. Shock settled like dust. The king's voice grew firm, echoing through the courtyard. "When each person believes their part does not matter, we end up with nothing." A hush fell over the kingdom. One man might have said, "My wine alone will not affect the taste." But many men thought the same. Instead of a gourd full of wine, we have water. People lowered their heads in shame. Tund's heart thudded painfully in his chest. He realized he was not alone in his selfish thinking, and that was exactly the problem. The king placed the cup down gently. "This is not a punishment," he said softly, "but a lesson." He motioned for the elders to bring forth a second empty gourd. "This time," he said, "bring what is true. For a kingdom is built not by the greatness of one, but by the faithfulness of many." The villagers went home in silence. They brought wine, not watered wine, not cheap wine, but their best. It took hours, but they returned with sincerity, regret, and a renewed sense of unity. This time, as the king dipped the ladle into the gourd, rich golden palm wine filled the cup. He drank. He smiled. The drums began again. Dancers twirled. Children cheered. And the feast became the most joyful celebration the kingdom had seen in years. That night, the people of Ahonanu learned a truth that settled deep in their hearts. When every person believes their part matters, beauty is preserved. But when everyone believes someone else will do the work, all we create is emptiness. From that day forward, the kingdom flourished, not because of the king's power, but because each person began to honor their own responsibility. And Tund? He became known not as the man who once brought water, but as the man who changed, who dedicated himself to teaching the young ones. One drop of commitment is more valuable than a gourd full of excuses.